Okay.
Great. Can I use this to go down?
You can, yeah,
Yes.
that will also work. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Hi, everybody. I'm one of the heritage building clan. That's my background. I'm the senior built heritage officer at Carmarthenshire County Council, but I didn't come from a sort of conservation background. I came more from a traditional building skills training and education background, not really as a practitioner, but as an enthusiast and as a promoter. So we deliver short and long courses, accredited, non-accredited, open days, education events, conferences, to anyone who wants to listen to us, really. We run events for surveyors, architects, planning agents, general public. So I haven't come too far today, not compared to some of you. Training and education, challenges for unique buildings. I have to say I was a little bit nervous when Roland contacted me because I'm not an earth building specialist. In fact, I actually know very little about earth building, but Tom, in his talk earlier, mentioned that the essence of eco-build and modern earth building is very much about buildings that are suited to the local climate using sustainable materials. And really that's what historic buildings were. You couldn't transport materials very long distances, so in many ways they were the eco-build, certainly the local vernacular buildings. This is a straw building in St Dogmaels in Pembrokeshire, and probably what many of you think about or aspire to building. This is an earth building again in Pembrokeshire, but this is a historic earth building, and this is an apple store in the Tywi Valley where we're based, and very similar to the earth buildings that people build today with rammed earth, similar in its properties, similar in the way it operates. So this is a photo really just to reinforce what I mean by a sustainable building built out of its the local building materials. And of course it's a unique building, and it's you place it within its local environment. This is in the west of Scotland. And this cottage is built to meet the requirements of the climate and the conditions that suit the inhabitants of that building. This too is a unique building. It's in St Dogmaels, and it's on the west coast of Wales. It's unique, but it is part of a local vernacular. And what makes it unique, although there's many buildings that look like that, are their local materials. And sometimes you can't always see what buildings are made of. This is a slide just to demonstrate uniqueness. This is again in the Tywi Valley. The front of this building is stone, and the back of this building is cob. It's a historic building. So you can't, although these buildings are all unique, and this is the sort of thing that makes them unique, they have many similar properties, and that's why I feel there's such a close link between heritage buildings, not just of mud and clom or cob like this building in Devon, but also it links to solid stone buildings which have earth mortars or lime mortars. And these are the buildings which I really wouldn't consider unique. You can't tell where they're from, and you can't tell that the materials could have come from anywhere. They just happen to have come. Those are in Birmingham, and the previous slide was from Swansea. So that was just a little, I suppose, my effort at saying why I'm qualified to talk at an earth building conference because really of the similarities between historic buildings and modern eco-builds that are built with earth. And these buildings do face many, many challenges, particularly when you look at it from a training and education point of view. And the most significant challenge really is that they are unique. No two buildings are the same. And it's all of these buildings, these heritage buildings or modern eco buildings, they're not, as Tim mentioned, they're not part of the mass market, the production line type construction, which is really how our construction industry is focused at the moment. But there are many commonalities, as I've just mentioned, amongst these buildings, and perhaps the biggest of these is that they have solid walls, and although they're built with different materials, many of them operate in the same way. And in fact, in Wales, a third of our historic building stock have these solid walls. So that's 500,000 homes. And by the very virtue of the fact that there's 500,000 of them, although they're all different, I would say you can mass those together, and immediately they should appear as part of the mainstream. They're marginalized. They are considered unique. They are considered as different. They're not part of the mainstream. So I'm just going to highlight 4 key challenges that particularly relate to training and education, which I need to be addressed to bring modern eco building and these other unique historic buildings much more into the mainstream. So college course content is driven by the biggest companies. I just wondered if there's any of you here, apart from Joe, who I know, who has been to a construction college, a modern FE college, to learn of any construction techniques. 1, 2, 3. 3 people. So very much in a minority. And probably from the experience of those people, this is quite a step away from what they would have learnt at college as part of their mainstream construction education. And one of the biggest reasons for this is that the college course content and funding for those courses is largely paid for where the needs of the biggest employers are supported. So employers pay a levy depending on the size of their companies, and the biggest companies pay the biggest levy, and arguably then with CITB, the Construction Industry Training Board, they have the biggest voice. And of course those construction companies are the largest house builders, the modern house builders, like those houses, builders of those houses we saw in Birmingham or in Swansea. And when you understand that there isn't a single stonemasonry course taught at any FE college in Wales, and yet you think about how many stone buildings you see across the country, you realise that there is an enormous gap between what the buildings need and what the people or the big employers think they need. There's an enormous gulf. The second challenge for these unique, or perhaps not so unique buildings, is that a critical mass of learners is required. And it's quite common for accreditation bodies like C-Skills or like City and Guilds to develop a qualification that's funded or supported by a particular initiative. But often if this doesn't get taken up by people, they slip off the radar. They're always reviewed and time limited. And when you think that many of the qualifications have hundreds of learners using these, it becomes very difficult for specialist trades, such as heritage trades or modern eco-build trades, to keep the accreditation companies interested in those qualifications. And you can see why. I mean, every course needs to be verified, has an external verifier, an internal verifier, a trained assessor, trainers. So it is a very big problem to keep that going. And of course, when you're looking for a critical mass of learners, you've got to have all those learners in the same location as well, or they're expected to travel to a particular site. So that's a challenge. A third challenge is that statutory regulation can't easily accommodate unique buildings. And we have things like building control, which I'm sure many of you know, and of course they're there for safety and for good practice. But just, for example, thinking about Part L of building control, which is the conservation of fuel and power, when you're calculating the thermal efficiency of a building, all measurements are measured in U values, or you look at their U values, and those are based on the known behavior of certain materials. But when you're thinking about these unique buildings built with local materials, there isn't a known U value and a known thermal efficiency of resistance for those buildings. So they don't exist on things like build desks. So when you're speaking to building control, they've got no way of comparing how these different buildings perform. Plus, particularly with historic buildings, how do you know what's behind that render? Or how do you know what's inside your solid stone wall? Whether you've got cavities, is that filled with earth? Is it filled with lime? Is it not filled at all? Do you have stones which run the whole way through the wall? So really we need to educate not just policymakers but regulators about the fact that these buildings, just because they might perform differently, it doesn't necessarily mean that they perform worse. And I think one of the big challenges, the fourth challenge here, is about sharing information. And sharing information is quite rare. If you're working in the construction sector, you don't have to have any CPD. And although the CITB does have certain training groups to support the industry, very often the information they get is broad. It's around business development or health and safety. And that, of course, is only if your company is registered with the CITB. And that's not mandatory. In fact, for a small company or for a sole trader, you're not actually allowed to be a member of CITB. And you think of certainly in Wales, of the makeup of the building community is really dispersed, really small, really isolated. And so getting access even to basic information about health and safety is a challenge. It really stifles sharing knowledge. So if you think that appropriate repair and maintenance aren't taught at college, there's no CPD for working in construction, companies, particularly in rural areas, are isolated, and in fact, like many businesses, companies are also competitive, so there's no real incentive to share information. But that all sounds awful. There are solutions. I mean, these buildings are unique, and I think within that, though, we have to grasp onto the fact that there are similarities, and we have to speak as one solid voice. Within Wales, certainly, there's some really, really exciting changes to the college curriculum. From September 2021, information on solid wall historic buildings will be included in all construction courses at the initial level. So students going into college at the age of 16 and 17 will, for the first time, appreciate that there are different building structures out there. And in fact, we're doing a lot at the moment at the Tywi Centre in training the trainer and going into colleges next week I'm in Wrexham with colleague Cambria, educating the tutors and supporting them with learning materials about passing on the fact how solid buildings operate, or just the simple facts that they're different. There's not a cavity wall structure. And just interestingly, for the first time, the head of CITB in Wales has the national UK-wide responsibility for heritage, and this is really the highest profile that heritage has ever had. So here in Wales, we're really looking to challenge Scotland for the top spot in heritage education and support and awareness. So it's important that we continue to undertake research and in all elements of better understanding these historic buildings, and to share good practice. So events like this are important. Events like the Stone and Earth Mortars Conference last week in York are really important to get those messages out there, to build on and share the research that's being undertaken. But we shouldn't just share it amongst ourselves. We need to produce good practice guides, make this information available across the social media and across the sector as a whole, amongst policymakers down to the individual homeowners. And dare I say it, this information really should be mainstream, and that's what's exciting about the Qualifications Wales review. We have to not see ourselves as separate. We have to embed this into mainstream delivery. And certainly from the heritage point of view, and the value that heritage has in terms of sort of long-term sustainability agenda, because of course historic buildings have a lot of embodied energy, it's that agenda is really playing to the benefit of the historic buildings, protection and appropriate repair and maintenance. And so the fifth thing really is about adopting a multi-pronged approach to change. It's not about educating one group or one sector. It's about having a whole overview of everyone and everything that contributes to building in a new way and looking after what's already been built that is of good quality. It's about delivering qualifications, developing more qualifications, getting these funded, about reaching out to policymakers. It's also about ensuring the supply chain of materials, and it's also about ensuring that the trainers are in place. It's about the whole picture. So I don't deny that there is we need to have beacons of good practice. We need to maintain the idea that these buildings are really special, and if individuality and uniqueness is the way that we really feel passionate about them and kind of engender our enthusiasm for them, well that's great. And we do need beacons of excellence like CAT and Ibuki, but we must also embrace the masses and help the mainstream construction industry along on this journey, because of course for the majority of buildings across the country, it'll be the mainstream contractors and builders and the mainstream colleges who we want to take this forward and to adopt these ideas. Okay, thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Nell. And I think if anyone has any burning questions, they can chase people at the tea break. But we are going to, if you can note down your questions, we're going to have a Q&A before lunch. So it's tea time now, and thank you to Lizzie for keeping us so totally on time. Hold on, Roland has something to say.
Just to say that this is also, as well as being our annual conference, it's also a dissemination event for our Training for Trainers project, JUMP,